The little girl ran down the hallway to her father. She was glad he had called her and wanted to find out why as soon as possible. She assumed that her father had called her because it was her birthday tomorrow. When she entered her father's office, she saw him standing near a chair with some man sitting in it who said that the baby was finally here. The baby looked fearfully at her father. She didn't understand what was wrong or who this man was. She sensed that something bad was happening. The father grabbed the girl's hand, and the stranger sitting in the chair said that this is a very cute child and it is even a pity to use her as a victim. The little girl was very frightened by the word victim. The daughter asked her father what was going on. He said if it would help His Highness, his decision would not change. The night before her 12th birthday, Regina was abandoned. It was done by the one she truly loved, her father. 6 years passed. In an alley, the girl was attacked by some men. The maid covered the girl with her body and told these scoundrels not to dare touch Milady. The strangers laughed off the servant's short stature and called her petty. The girl tried to protect her servants' Uni and asked them not to do anything to them. After all, her father was the Marquis of the Northlands. One of the men said that the daughter of the Marquis would not walk around with one servant in such a turbulent time, and asked her to think of something more plausible. He took the girl by the chin with his hand and said she was a beauty and could be sold for more money. He said that although it was a little late, he was sure that others had spotted her as well. Uni's little servants rushed to defend my lady and shouted for those scoundrels to back off, but they only laughed in response and said that she could be sold well too, and the perverts would definitely like her. The stranger grabbed Reina's arm and said it was pointless to resist. He told her to go with him nicely. At that moment, someone grabbed the attacking man and threw him headfirst into the wall. The robbers and the girls saw a man in a cloak. His face could not be seen. The man who was attacking the girls tried to hit the man in the cloak, but he failed. The attackers realized that it was pointless to resist and fled out of sight. The girls were scared and thought that this man was also a villain trying to sell them. He took off his hood and asked if everything was all right, said it was dangerous here and offered to walk them home, but there was nowhere to go. The savior set up a table for the girls to eat. Reina thanked Mr. Rin and said he was the first to help them without asking for anything in return. The guy held his hand to his face and said that he just didn't expect them to follow him. Reina told him that he was the one who suggested they go to him because there was nowhere else to go. Mr. Rin wondered if they'd just go with a stranger like that. The girls said they introduced themselves to each other, and Ona said her name was Rina Rubel, and he introduced himself as Rin. The guy said that knowing only the first name, they were still strangers. Rina said if he wanted them to leave, they would leave. Mr. Rin replied that wasn't what he was saying, and it was just thinking out loud. He asked not to take it personally. Uni's little helper said that he embarrassed them himself, and now he's telling them not to take it personally. Rina asked her to be quieter. Mr. Rin clarified with the girl. Earlier she said that Marquis Rubel is her father. He didn't hear that he has a daughter. The girl replied that officially yes, but who needed to know? Those knew the truth that there was a daughter in that family. Rin pondered that she could be an unofficial daughter, an illegitimate child. He asked why they shouldn't return home, although he didn't know all the circumstances. But life in the capital was much more chaotic, and the attack that happened to them could happen again. After all, she was conspicuous because she was beautiful. He said that because of her beauty, it was very easy to attract attention, and she could easily be sold for good money, and many asked for a fee to help. Rina assumed that he would want to charge them too. Mr. Rin realized that he must have scared the girl. He stood up, put the knife on the table in front of her, and said that she needed it for safety, and she could use it when it came in handy. But the young lady didn't know how to use that knife, so he said if he came near, she could stick that dagger in him. And he showed her how to do it by sticking the knife into a chicken that was on the table. He was about to leave. Rina followed and told the boy that he was too. Mr. Rin turned around in bewilderment and asked what she was talking about. The girl smiled and said that he was handsome too. He didn't understand why she brought it up and thought that maybe she wasn't very smart. During the night, Rina woke up to some noise. When she opened her eyes, she saw Mr. Rina hovering over her and holding his finger to her mouth, showing her to be quiet. She looked at him incomprehensibly and asked if she needed to stick a dagger in him now. He told the girls to hide under the bed now. The very men who had wanted to steal the girl and from whom Rin had saved them had burst into the bedroom. The villains called him a bastard and told him to give back the girl he had stolen. Rin said they were delusional and told them to fuck off good. One of the villains cut his palm and put a magic stone on the cut. They summoned the undead just to take one girl. A monster with red eyes and huge teeth appeared and tried to attack Mr. Rin. It drew its sword and began to fight back. The boy tossed the foul thing aside, but it attacked him again. Rena ran out from under the bed, waving her arms and asking them to stop. Mr. Rin told her to get out of the way and pointed his sword towards the monster. The villains who came after the girl laughed and said she should be naive in moderation. The young lady replied that they were the ones who were naive. She told them to stop at least for now, because such violence and coercion she would not be able to forgive. The attackers laughed and told her that she was not healthy. The monster headed towards the girl, but she pulled out the dagger Mr. Rin had given her and chopped the undead's head off. Everyone stood there with their mouths open, and they were very surprised. The girl said that they were really naive. One of the gang of bandits that rushed in was still holding the magic stone in his cut hand. It glowed and the man's eyes turned red. He turned into a monster and attacked one of his friends and then ran towards Rena. The girl dealt with him as well. He was dead. She said that you can't grab anything and it's dangerous and asked the other two bandits, "Since when did this man carry a stone altar?" They were silent in response. The girl turned to them and asked if her question sounded too kind. One of the bandits replied that he said he found this stone by accident about 3 months ago. Rena said she would confiscate this stone and they would have to take responsibility for what they had done. Uni crawled out from under the bed and said that it was nothing and a mistake can always be corrected. She held out her palms towards the bandits and told them to give everything they had. The next day, Uni was cleaning the house and Mr. Rin asked Rena if it was all a game, how she was playing weak. The girl replied that she never once tried to make herself look weak, she was just observing basic etiquette. The guy asked if, in her opinion, letting a gang of bandits get themselves taken away was a trivial courtesy. Uni said that everyone needed it, them, the attackers, and the other good girls, and, of course, they had to take care of the pay as they went along. Rena said it was a kind of restitution, and besides, they needed to cover travel expenses, so it was all unavoidable. Mr. called it a robbery. The young lady said that out of the many words, he chose robbery. And Mr. Rin reflected that if you think about it, she didn't ask for help at all then. He blushed and said that he only interfered in vain. Rena showed him the stone and said there were more important matters and told him about the case he mentioned. It was the altar stone. This stone, it was the key that unlocked the gates of hell. It appeared about a century ago and changed the history of mankind. In the capital, Rin heard that the altar stone was in this city and was just investigating. Mr. Rin understood that this girl was very perceptive and why he even thought she could be naive. Regina said that the stone now belonged to her and asked what he would do. Would he try to take it away? Rin said that of course the thing was very important, but he wasn't going to take it away by force. The girl replied that she knew he would and told him that he was really nice. The young lady explained to him that he had intervened for a reason, and even though the rescue wasn't necessary, it was still kind of her to be kind. She thanked him profusely and handed him the stone, saying it was the promised reward. Rin took the stone and said that he would gladly accept it. However, it was too much for gratitude, and he promised to repay in any way he could. The girl replied that she would wait and asked if he was going back to the palace, for the deed was finished. Mr. Rin said he could not accompany them and had companions. She was curious to know what he was doing, but she didn't ask and told him that they would see each other back at the palace. Mr. Rin arrived at the tent city and was greeted by the knights who told His Highness that he was finally back. They inquired how the investigation went. Rin said that the brigands had used this stone in stealing. One of the knights announced to everyone that in 2 days of investigation, His Highness had discovered the altar and the goal was reached, and they were returning to Grandi Grazia. They mounted their horses and set off on their journey. On the way, Mr. Rin thought about Regina. He remembered how she called him cute and thought about how it should have been him saying that and not her. She seemed strange to Mr. Rin because the girl pretended to be naive. She was a robber, but she was honest enough. He was curious to see how she would react if she knew that he was the Duke of the Eastern Lands. The Duke's loyal knight named Deka asked if something good had happened because Mr. Rin was smiling and it was obvious that he was in a good mood. The Duke asked his knight if Rubel had a daughter. The North and West had a rather tense relationship. The knight said he had heard that there was a daughter and she died many years ago, and her name was Rina or Regina. The Duke realized that he thought she was an illegitimate daughter and she turned out to be dead, and it turns out he had seen the ghost of Regina Rubel yesterday. He decided he would find out the next time he saw her. Regina and Uni rode in the carriage, and the servant said that it was not often that one met such an honest young man. They tried to guess what he might have been doing, for his clothes looked ragged. Uni asked the lady when they would meet her father at the palace, where would she start the conversation? The young lady thought about it and said she would start by greeting him and asking if he had been doing well all this time, and then give him a chance to ask for forgiveness. Until the age of 6, Rena lived alone on a suburban estate. On the advice of the adults, the Viscount's wife had to distance herself from her daughter to focus on raising a successor. Little Regina was always surrounded by loneliness. Looking at the portrait of her parents, she only dreamed of the day when she could return home. She would talk to the portrait and tell her father and mother that she missed them. Time passed, and one day, in Regina's 6th year, she was called by a servant from the main manor because the order to return had come. Overjoyed, Regina returned home. Her parents, whom she had only seen in a portrait, were even more beautiful than she had imagined. She greeted her father and mother and said that she was Regina Rubel. The girl believed that now every day would be filled with happiness. As the carriage drove closer to the palace, Regina and Uni saw that there were a lot of people there. Uni said that by the time they got in line, it would already be night. Regina replied that they didn't need to wait and asked if she had taken the invitation. The maid pulled out the invitation the gentleman had given and said it was in her purse. Uni gave the invitation to the knight. He apologized for not recognizing them and welcomed them to the Empire Day celebration. Entering the palace, little Uni began to look at everything. Regina stood in front of the mirror. The aide asked if she was going to see the Lord. The lady replied that he would call her if he needed her. Uni asked if she was going straight to the meeting. Regina replied that no special condition was needed for a child to meet her parents, and she would go see her father. On the girl's way to see her father, knights met and blocked her way. They said it was impossible to go there and told her to leave. The guards gave the girl a note that said not to dare to take advantage of her father's loss, and this time he would limit himself to a warning and there would be no next time. The girl asked them to tell her again that Regina Rubel was very insistent on seeing her, but she heard again that she could not go there, and the guards told her to leave. The butler came in and called the girl in for tea, and she asked him how he had been living all this time. The butler was indignant and asked what she was doing and why she was pretending to be a dead person. Regina replied that it was true. The girl couldn't believe that the butler didn't recognize her. She reminded him that when she was a child, she fell down the stairs every day, and he had carpeted the stairs of her room. And so, just outside the room was carpeted in 2 layers, so she would be less traumatized. She said that these carpets increased the height of the stairs, and now not only she but others were falling there one after another. The butler indignantly asked where she heard about this and told her to stop pretending, for their lady was dead. The butler told the girl that if she had known how sad the master was then, she would never have dared to do such a thing. The man realized that she had come a long way and suggested that she drink her tea and leave. He let the servant go and said he would make the tea himself. The butler was running through his mind thinking that the poor lady had come back for nothing. He took some powder out of his pocket and poured it into a cup of tea and gave it to the lady. She realized that it didn't matter what she said. It wouldn't affect her in any way or form. She asked just to give her father at least a hello, and to tell him that she was inquiring about his health. She asked the butler what he thought if she was discovered as a corpse tomorrow, then laughed and said she was joking. The lady drank her tea and left. Returning to her assistant, Regina collapsed to the floor. She asked for help getting up and said that judging from the state of her legs, it was paralyzing poison. Uni asked her where she had gotten the poison since it had been so little time since she had left. The lady said that this poison was given to her by a dear person and she could not refuse. It was a silent and powerful poison. If left untreated, it would leave the body paralyzed, imperceptibly robbing it of the ability to breathe. Suddenly, Regina laughed. The assistant was horrified and asked what was happening to the girl. She replied that she was just laughing because the butler came out to her instead of her father, and she had come all the way out here and ended up only being honored with one note, but it was very touching. She let Uni look at the note and said it said not to use her father's loss. The aide said it wasn't touching, and in her opinion, that line was more likely to cause anger. The lady said that paternal bereavement means wounding. It means he may regret what he has done, and then you want to believe that, at least a little bit, he feels guilty towards her. Uni asked if she really believed those words. Regina replied that it was a 1 in a million chance and she was confused, but then she heard poison being put in the tea. The girl said she tried to find out a little more and saw the butler turn pale. It was very funny, and he was trying so hard that she couldn't help but drink it, and besides, the poison wouldn't kill her. Uni said that even if she didn't die, the pain inside would remain, and tomorrow they would probably come to check on her condition. Regina said that was why she should visit her father and say hello first. The aide suggested that, in that case, they might send in an assassin next time. Reina thought about the fact that it was likely that they would send an assassin. The assistant said that first, they should divide the bed and figure out where Uni sleeps and where Regina Rubel sleeps. Regina couldn't sleep at night. Her whole body was burning, and she assumed it was because of the poison she drank during the day. She walked to the terrace exit. There was a full moon in the window. The girl opened the door to the terrace, stepping out into the fresh air. She saw that the ball was in full swing, and from the outside, it looked like a lot of fun. There were lights on everywhere and music playing. She was originally supposed to be among them if her father hadn't sold her out. Regina jumped over the fence and jumped out of the balcony and into the courtyard. It was said that the night garden was the best place for secret rendezvous. The lady heard someone behind her and remembered Uni saying that they might send an assassin to her next time, but she didn't expect it to be so soon. When Regina turned her head, she was shocked. Mr. Rin was standing in front of her and told her not to panic. The girl looked at him and told him that she completely forgot to bring a safety measure with her. The guy replied that she could do without it. The girl laughed and said that they had met earlier than she thought, and he, in that time, had changed a lot. Regina said she was taking a walk. Duke replied that he was busy doing the same. He saw that the girl was back in the same shirt and threw his jacket over her. It was a show of concern. Mr. Rin asked if she had met her father. Regina asked if it was a question or a test. The guy replied that he had only heard that she had been treated roughly at the door. She was surprised that he knew almost everything. He asked why she was looking for a meeting with Rubel. Regina replied that, as she had noticed, her affairs were very interesting to him, and yet, he didn't tell her anything about himself. Mr. Rin said that he belonged to the Eastern lands and her father to the Northern lands, and they didn't have a good relationship with the North. That's why he didn't tell her. He was afraid that she would be uncomfortable. The lady realized that he hid his identity for her sake too. She said that she wanted to exist. That was the reason she was looking to meet her father, because now she didn't actually exist and was wiped out of the world. But what was even stranger was that she was alive. She had said that her death was a more natural thing, and that's why she had come to let her father take over. But in the end, she couldn't even meet him. Duke looked at Regina's back and thought about how amazing it was. Because usually empathetic people are soft and strong people are cold. But this girl is gentle and yet resilient. The boy said that if suddenly her marquis rejected her, let her come to the east. Regina replied that he was interesting, for she had thought him a minor pawn since he had sought out the altar alone, but apparently his position was much higher. She asked if it would be better if she addressed him as Your Majesty Duke on their next meeting. As Mr. Rin expected, she was very perceptive. He blushed and said that in front of others, perhaps he should. He asked what he should call Regina on their next meeting. She said that, in front of others, he could call her Lady. But when they were alone, he could call her by her first name. The Duke said that he often takes walks at night to get some fresh air. The girl smiled and said it was a coincidence, for she too loves night walks. The butler brought Regina's father a letter from her. It said that he must be wondering why she was looking to see him after all this time. The daughter wrote that she was also curious as to why he had done this to her. In the letter, Regina promised that if he explained the reason to her, she would also share with him why she was here and what she could do. At the end of the letter, she wrote that she was looking forward to the reunion of father and daughter. Marquis asks the butler what happened and how the girl survived. The butler said it was a powerful poison. The master was sure it was not a mistake, for he knew of the scrupulousness of his employee. The servant promised to straighten everything out and promised that there would be no trouble this time. At that moment, a servant came in and said that she had the information he was asking for. She told him that Regina Ruibel had been invited by the Duke of the Southern Lands. Marquis was shocked that she was invited by the Duke of the South personally. The butler said that it was strange, after all, if she was the guest of honor of such an influential person. Why did she arrive alone yesterday, unaccompanied? Regina's father replied that she was probing the ground and wanted to see how he would react. If she was a guest from the Duke of the South, it could be considered an insult that could not be tolerated. She was forbidden to enter and tried to poison her. The Marquis said his daughter had become much smarter since they'd been away. He had no idea where she'd been. At the same moment, in the palace where the Duke of the Southern Lands was staying, he greeted Regina and her servants. The girl asked Duke Alice if he had slept well last night. The Duke called Regina a knight and said that she always surprises him because she did not notify him of her arrival, but yesterday she had already visited the Marquis of Ruibel and did not even tell him a word about it. Regina replied that she had nothing to say and apologized that she should have greeted him first. He replied that he wasn't asking for an apology, but that he was concerned about a bigger issue. He asked why a mercenary hired at great expense suddenly showed up in a skirt. Silent war. For several centuries in a row, there had been a war with the dead in the Southern Lands. This war began and ended in silent silence, and the reason was that the dead reacted to sound, their bone-dry bodies wandering across the field, staggering from side to side. But once the sounds were heard, they suddenly changed. Duke Alice was there, gripped by a sense of imminent defeat. He had overreached, and there was nothing left of the troops. At the time, the Duke thought it was the end. He looked at Regina in her armor. She looked like she was going to die before anyone else. He was very sorry that even the children had to be sent away to war, and he couldn't show his support for the lives that were gone. He promised that he would at least protect her life for the rest of her life. But at the very last moment, before his death, a miracle happened. It was only then that the Duke of the Southern Lands realized that among the firewood that he had gathered with his own hands was a torch with a sacred fire. Duke Alice asked Regina to answer why she was now an ordinary woman. He asked if it was a real appearance. She responded by suggesting that he clear up the misunderstanding, for starters. She said that she had never made herself look like a man. Uni confirmed the girl's words and said that she only wore clothes appropriate to the occasion. The Duke realized that everything was as it was said. The knight never presented herself as a man. Regina said she was embarrassed that she had surprised him and asked if that could be a problem, since he had invited her, not a man. The Duke asked her why she was seeking a meeting with Ruibel, the Marquis of the Northlands, and asked what she had in common with him. The lady replied that she was his daughter, and to put it more accurately, a daughter who made life difficult by her existence. The Duke realized that the story was very confusing and promised not to ask about it again, but he said that the North will definitely find out everything, and this act might have been rash. The ruler asked what she planned to do next, and if she had considered his position. Regina said that she would be glad if he would protect her. The Duke asked if her words meant that she was suggesting that he antagonized the Northern Lands. The girl replied that it did not, and she was asking him to side with the weak. The Duke said he would not be drawn out, and said that she could use him as much as he used her. However, if the hard-won security of the Southern Lands was jeopardized due to interference in her affairs, he would not stand aside. The Empire of Grazia. Thanks to the past Emperor Nihil, Grazia was reborn on the lands of the once-destroyed Kingdom of Grazia, centered on the capital city of Grandis Grazia. The empire itself was divided into south and north. The blood descendants of the imperial family were each given a land. The eastern lands were led by the illegitimate son of the past Eastern Duke, but because of his origins, he could not receive the title of the imperial family of Grazia. His name was Rignan Eitner. Western lands. The Duke of the Western Lands was defeated in a war and moved to the capital as a cardinal. Past Duke of the Western Lands, the current cardinal is Clavis Serentium Gracia, Southern Lands. Duke of the Southern Lands until recently, endured the war with great effort, and with the help of the executor, emerged victorious, barely coming out of the battle alive, Bill Alice Gracia, Northern Lands. After the past Southern Duke fell in war, his eldest son inherited the title and won the war. In the Northern Lands, the Duke of Ayura is Flenus Gracia, and personal reasons created a deep enmity. One day, when the Empire of Grazia was 100 years old south, North and the Cardinal gathered in the hall to negotiate. Clavis asked Duke Alice what was done last night, for that was all everyone was talking about, for he had used some girl to make trouble for Marquis Rubel. Yura said that it was very frivolous to use a girl like any inferior rabble. Duke Alice asked if they had thought that everything had been deliberately conceived so that the North would sooner recognize this child and think over his act. Yura said that it didn't matter if it was real or a game. He asked why the South did an act that could shake the North's spirits. Duke Alice said in response that his insolence knew no bounds. Clavis intervened and told Alice that normally he wouldn't have missed such a thing and would not have flared up, and told him to save his reputation. Clavis asked why no one had called the East Duke to the negotiations. Alice replied that he was a pathetic brat, born of a slave, unworthy of the title of Duke, and there was nothing to call him. Everyone present agreed with his opinion. Clavis was glad that fortunately it was possible to change the subject. Suddenly, Mr. Rin abruptly burst into the meeting room. He held a servant by the hood and said that this boy had not told him about the gathering place until the last, and he asked the dukes if they were the ones who had ordered him to keep quiet. Clavis replied that the East Duke was just in time to arrive. Mr. Rin said that the mice were squeaking so hard at their secret gathering that they could be heard even outside the palace. He asked what they were discussing with such interest and put his foot on a servant lying on the floor. Alice asked what he was doing and said that if he wanted to sit at the round table, he must first learn manners. The guest who entered sat down in a chair and put his feet up on the table. Duke Alice was furious and considered Rignan Aderner a rabid dog of the Eastern Lands and a bloody dog. Yura stood up and said he wouldn't stand for it anymore and left. The rest of the dukes did the same. After the meeting, Mr. Rin dismissed the servants, came to his chambers and lay down on his bed. He pondered that perhaps he had overdone it. After all, the Southern Duke was much older than he was, but it couldn't be helped. He thought it was better to receive hatred instead of neglect. He remembered the face of Anna, who he told his subordinate to find out everything about, and this girl was in the South Duke's guest, a close associate of the one who despises him, so it was all for nothing. She was an enemy. An hour before the Duke's negotiations began, Uni and Anna were walking down the corridor, the little servant saying that she wouldn't stay away, and they had been invited to cover themselves and were now making themselves look tough. Her gaze settled on a letter that lay by the door to Anna's chambers. She picked up the letter and saw that there was no sender listed. Uni had said it was fine that she was invited to the ball, but the girl was sure she was just being tested, and right now no one in the Imperial Palace knew her, and it was unclear who the sender was. But if he had sincere intentions, he would have come to greet her first. Rena thought that this card was a test of how much she was aware of high society. If she ignored the invitation, she would be considered arrogant, and if she found a companion, she would be called calculating. Uni realized that whatever the lady chose, it would all turn against them, and asked how she would proceed. Rena asked her assistant to get the very dress that was one of the reasons for their poverty and said it would be nice to decorate it with fresh flowers. She wanted an embroidered fan and lavish jewelry. Ladies do not avoid controversy. As expected, today was the last day of the evening ball, so the scope was amazing. The guests were impressed to see a whole lake of champagne and thought that His Highness's sense of beauty was a gift from God. The guests were wondering if that rumored girl would come to the ball, and even if she didn't, they assumed everyone had already made a bet on exactly how she would show up. Clavis had told Mr. Ruveda that thanks to his meticulousness, tonight's ball promised to be more interesting. The guests froze in anticipation of this girl's appearance. The doors opened and Rena entered the ball. They looked at her and wondered how she could be so naive, and discussed the way she was dressed. Clavis realized that this was Rena Rubel's child, and he wondered what she would do next. The girl walked leisurely down the hall. One of the guests laughed and said that it did not matter that she was beautiful, because she had come to the evening alone, even unaccompanied, and said that the girl did not know a bit about etiquette. In response to his words, Rena only grinned, which surprised everyone. Clavis pondered that she had decided to play ahead of the game. He thought it was a bold strategy and pondered if she could pull it off alone. The woman turned to Rena and asked how dare she show up here. Realizing that Rena was not responding, she went to the manager and asked to be kicked out of this ball because she was not up to royal status. Clavis watched all this and laughed, their gazes crossed with Anna's. One of the guests, an outraged man, ran up to Rena and said that it shouldn't be that way for some girl to show up to the ball unauthorized, and ran towards the lady. Rena pushed him away. He fell to the floor, and she revealed that she had a formal invitation. Clavis kept laughing and told Mr. Ruid that it didn't look like anyone was going to get hurt, and asked if that was why he had invited her. Rena could see that everyone around her was pissed off and knew that should be enough. She didn't know who had set this trap, but thanks to him, she was able to introduce herself. Mr. Ruid walked up to Rena and thanked her for responding to the invitation. The lady realized that this was the man who had sent her the invitation and thanked him for inviting her. He kissed the girl's hand and asked if she was leaving. Rena replied that no one was asking her to dance, and unfortunately she had to bow out. Ruid said that if she was sorry, let her stay longer, as she could dance with him. He grabbed Lady by the shoulders. She could not understand what was wrong with him, for he was very rude and tactless, and the people around were watching everything that was going on. Rena didn't realize who he was. This man was holding a glass in his hand, and he was being poured champagne. He asked Anna if she would have a drink before going dancing with him. The girl replied that she would not. Ruid took her chin with his fingers and said that if she didn't want it, let her have it, and poured a glass of champagne over her head. The rude man asked her not to refuse a drink offered by a great man like him. This was the younger brother of the Duke of the Northern Lands, Ruid Flenis Grazia. Rena realized what he was like, for she was curious as to who had sent the invitation, and he must have decided to humiliate the scoundrel who had caused trouble for the North. Ruid took out a handkerchief, hung it on the girl's dress, laughed, and said that it was customary for women to be called for money. The guests saw how discouraged she was. They were becoming more and more interested. Rena pondered what she should do. She could splash champagne on his face too, or slap him and pull his hair. If it were her will, she would have done so. But the girl smiled, took the flower off her dress along with her handkerchief, and gave it to the person who had invited her to the ball, bowed, and left. Rena rushed down the hallway to her room and realized that this was a failure, for she thought she would make her existence known unhindered. But it had all gone downhill. She realized that she needed to calm down, and she couldn't be the same as she was before. And what had happened today could not be conceded to a scoundrel like Ruid. When she opened the door, she saw Uni, who greeted her and told her that she was back sooner than she thought. Anna had a ragged look and smelled of alcohol. The girl told her assistant that she would explain everything later and asked her to help her get ready since she was leaving again. Uni said it would take a long time to change into a dress, but Rena asked her to get her uniform ready, since she had gone down the wrong path from the beginning and wore a dress to the mongrel squabble. Clavis was telling Ruid how sorry he felt for Lady Rena. He heard back that it was disgusting. They discussed how embarrassed she was since she had dressed up for the ball. The girl's abuser called her ugly, while Clavis said that with her looks she could be called beautiful. Suddenly, their gazes were fixed on the girl who had entered the ball. They didn't understand who it was, but judging from the color of the uniform, it was someone from the highest nobility of the southern lands. But they didn't recall anyone like that from the south. Ruid looked at her and resented why she was staring at him like that. Rena asked if he would dance one song with her. The guy recognized her, and she said he couldn't say no to her after everything that had happened. She took his hand and pulled him forcefully into the audience. Ruid couldn't believe a girl could have that much strength. He yelled for her to let him go, but the girl said they would dance right there. Naturally, they would dance even if he said no. The girl said it was her first time at the ball, so she couldn't catch the atmosphere right away. She told her offender that if he had warned her in advance that he liked rudeness, she would have adjusted to him at once. The prince realized that it wasn't enough for the girl to humiliate him. She also arbitrarily decided to reconcile. Rina spun him around in a dance and he almost fell into the champagne fountain, but she caught him. Ruid said that if she took her hand away and he fell, he would send her to the other side of the world. The lady let go of her abuser. There were marks from her hands on his wrist. He wanted to slap her, but the lady defended herself with her palm and told him that since he had not changed his mind, in that case, let him bathe and pushed him into the champagne fountain. She said that the champagne, which everyone had been waiting for, was spilled, and instead of a cork, the precious body of His Highness the Prince. Clavis, watching all this, laughed and started clapping his hands. He said it was amazing, and Ruid slapped his hand on the floor, and Rina felt that it must be the power of the north. Nihil Grazia returned from the tomb endowed with divine power. With the power obtained in the tomb, she saved the entire world. People called this power right. Nihil Grazia distributed the divine power obtained in the tomb among her descendants, ruling an empire divided into 4 parts. The younger brother of the northern Duke of Ura, Ruid Flenus Grazia, he researched this power and obtained a right called the Cut. He approached Rina and told her that it was not too late to beg for forgiveness, and then he would leave her 1 eye. Rina replied that she didn't know what to do since she only had 2 eyes. Ruid swung around and told the girl that she would now lose both her eyes. At that moment, someone entered the hall and said that it was time for the prince to leave. Rina noticed that the rampaging debauchee calmed down in 1 second. She wondered who it was because of. She turned her head and saw her father, Marquis of the Northern Lands, Cardo Rubel, saying that that was enough for today and it was time for the prince to return. He told the debauchee to walk. Rina wanted to call for her father, but he had no reaction to the word father. She turned to him, appropriate to his status, and asked about the wound he spoke of. The man replied that it had nothing to do with her. In the palace where the Northern Duke was staying, a conversation began between Ruid and Rina's father. They were discussing who this girl was, and they didn't know exactly. The humiliated prince said that they looked very much alike, and perhaps she was indeed his daughter. Cardo replied that his daughter was dead, and he was sure she was just a rogue who had decided to take advantage of his weakness. He thanked the prince for intervening in his place. Ruid asked him to leave his vile flattery for others, and said that he hated this kind of behavior, and it could undermine the prestige of the imperial family. They had fought, and now the prince looked like a mouse that had gone down in the water. Ruid said to hell with those southern bastards, and even though they had brought some mongrel to hurt them, it wouldn't change anything. He said the Duke of the Southern Lands had lost all his children in the war, and his memory wasn't what it used to be. Cardo said that this girl was targeting an old man who lost his children, so he couldn't resist. He realized that the prince was very naive and didn't even allow the thought of doubts that this child was really his daughter. During the conflict that was going on at the ball, Mr. Rin was sitting outside on a bench, and he felt an unusual explosion and was sure that it was the rumbling of a certain power of Grazia. He realized that using the power in the palace, not even on the battlefield, was strange. And only a fool like Ruid, the younger brother of the Duke of the Northern Lands, would be capable of such an idiotic act. He thought that perhaps he was even more of a fool for having waited aimlessly for an hour. He heard a voice behind him saying that he was still here today. Turning his head, the Duke saw Rina, who greeted him. The lad noticed that she wasn't wearing a nightgown today and asked if she had attended any of the festivities. The lady responded by offering to talk about something interesting. Rin noticed that Rina looked very tired and suggested that something might have happened. He realized that he owed it to her to tell her everything. Rina asked him if he had been waiting for her all this time. The Duke replied that it was true, and he had indeed been waiting and said that he should say goodbye. The girl looked at him in bewilderment and didn't understand why he was saying that. He warned that there would be no more night walks and asked her to forget about her meeting him here. Rin went on to talk about what he had heard, that she was a guest of the Duke of the Southern Lands. Rina explained that she wasn't hiding it on purpose. The Duke replied that he knew she was a good person. However, he should treat her like a dog brat from now on. Regina explained that a few months ago, the Emperor had issued a decree to select and bring in the bravest knights. He assumed that must be the reason the Duke of the Southern Lands had invited her. Guy explained that the emperor would order the expansion of the empire's borders, and the north, south, and west, who had strained relations, might clash on the battlefield. The Duke said that there was a high probability that they would attack each other in time of invasion, and therefore, he and she were sworn enemies. Rena replied that it wouldn't work that way, and his cold-bloodedness was begging for her to torture him. The lady took the Duke by the shoulders and sat him on a bench, and suggested that it was a peculiarity of the men of the imperial court, and said that the prince of the northern lands was also rather indifferent, and asked if they happened to be friends. Mr. Rin became indignant and said that there was no way they would ever be friends in their lives, and asked not to associate him with that jerk. Rena confirmed that he was right when he said that she was as a representative of the Duke of the Southern Lands, but that was no reason to become enemies at all. The girl revealed that she didn't want that. Rignan replied that it wasn't something that could simply be avoided. The girl asked why, since he had helped her when she told him that she came from the northern lands. The guy replied that this was a different case, and she could get hurt if she got close to him. Rena replied that she was capable of dealing with her own problems. Rin asked if it was worth putting herself in that kind of danger. Rena replied that it was worth it on its own because she liked him. She smiled. Mr. Rin blushed. The girl reminded him that he owed her something when he promised to repay her in any way he could for giving him the altar stone. Her wish was to continue their friendship. Rena said she would accept it as repayment. The Duke replied that by doing so, she would make him look like a coward. The lady held out her palms to him and offered to live amicably until one of them died. Rignan said that was a very emphatic promise, but still held out his hand to her in return. He asked the girl to promise that she wouldn't penetrate him too much. After his words, Mr. Rin blushed even more, and Rena told him that he seemed to be very embarrassed by his own words. She said that she didn't know what to do since she already liked him a lot. The Duke said that such sympathy meant nothing, and it was just an attraction to the opposite sex. He said to be sure to tell her if she fell in love with him or something. Rena pondered that it didn't really sound like he was a narcissist, and there must be another reason to explain his behavior. She said that everything was wonderful, and she wasn't planning on getting into a relationship either. Being someone's partner for one dance was enough for her. She asked the Duke not to worry about anything and just enjoy himself and gave him a red rose. Marquis Cardot was looking out the window and enjoying the beautiful night. His musings were interrupted by Clavis, who walked in on him and asked if there was anything he wanted to ask him. The man asked why the child was alive, for, he was told, she had been sacrificed and there was not even a corpse left. Clavis said it's cruel and his daughter survived, and instead of being happy he says things like that. Cardot said that this child is conspiring with the Duke of the Southern Lands, and he is worried that the Duke will find out about their plans. Clavis sipped from his glass of wine and said it was too late to worry about anything. He told the Marquise that his daughter had already seen and recognized him, and when their gazes crossed, she smiled, beautifully, at the man who had pushed her into hell. The Duke said that the child they had made a sacrifice had returned by turning into a monster, and his daughter had reached the imperial palace on her own. They were sure she could speak against them. The Marquis needed to meet her in person and find out what she wanted, because to him she would definitely answer. That was an order. One day a rift appeared, and a place, with scarlet sky and damp earth, was called the tomb. Clavis wished to seize the right, the power that the tomb gave the emperor. In order to get his hands on power equal to the emperor, he secretly pushed countless little girls into the tomb. The desire to get hold of power equal to the emperor's is rebellion, so the Marquis had to hide not only the truth that he sold his own daughter, but the real secret was that he joined the rebellion. Duke Alice was walking with Regina and asked where she disappeared to every night, and said that he had heard that last night she had made some noise in the shape of the southern lands. Rena replied that she defended the honor of the South and won. The Duke said that today he would officially declare her the representative of the southern lands and asked her to keep her cool. He said that today was the day the Empress would finally give the order to enter the war and told her to listen. They entered the ceremonial hall. Rena saw Mr. Rena, who called Bill Alice the old fox of the South. The girl was pleased to see her lover in a new light. The entourage of the North also stood in full attendance. Rena's eyes crossed with her father's. Alice told the girl to stay close to her, Everyone was announced to maintain silence and show manners. The Empress enters. Everyone bowed to Empress Nihil Grazia. She said that she was glad to see them all, and that she had seen some of the children for the first time, and some she had met a couple of times already, and asked why they had gathered. Clavis, who was standing next to the Empress, said that today was the day the Empire was founded. Nihil waved her hand and told them to begin. Clavis announced that today was a happy day, and to celebrate the centennial of the Empire, Her Majesty had ordered the expansion of the territory and the new place that Her Highness desired, right under this earth. It was a tomb. The Empress said that Duke Bill Alice was on the threshold of war, and, for his services in winning the war against the dead, he could state his wish. He bowed before the Empress and asked to be allowed to shift the powers of the South to a younger generation that could be trusted. Nihil rose from her throne and asked who was in question. Rena stepped forward, bowed to the Empress, and introduced herself. The Empress touched her sword to the knight's neck and said that she had gotten this far under that despicable name, and she would deal with her proper now. At the spot where the Empress had touched with her sword, blood protruded on Rena's neck. Nihil told her to enter the tomb, putting her life on the line. She smiled and said she would do as she wished. Rena's father addressed her, calling her lady. She walked beside Alice and did not react in any way to what the Marquis was saying to her. He turned to the girl again and asked for a moment. Regina stopped and said that she was not a lady, and it would be proper to address her as a knight. Marquis said she was right, and he had made a mistake and asked for a moment of her attention, promising it wouldn't take long. Rena said she agreed if it wouldn't take long. Regina and her father sat in a private room over a cup of tea. He told his daughter that she looked good. The girl asked if he recognized her. The father replied that he couldn't help but recognize his daughter. The Marquis said that she had made a dangerous choice in taking the place of the Duke of the Southern Lands. The girl laughed and said that he was taking it too far. Rena told her father that there was something he needed to do before he began his moralizing. The Marquis knelt in front of the girl and apologized. Rena replied that she could not say that she had not imagined this moment, but when it happened, she did not feel the proper joy. The girl sat down to her father and asked why he had done that to her. The Marquis said that he couldn't believe she had reappeared and thought he would never see her again. Tears came to the man's eyes. Regina told her father that she would have definitely believed him if there hadn't been an attempted poisoning. The man asked what he could do for her. The girl replied that she wanted to live under her own name and asked him to recognize her existence officially. The Marquis replied to his daughter that he could not accomplish this. She asked why. He replied that it was a rebellion, and the cardinal had taken him away to oppose the Empress. If the truth were revealed, she would become the rebel's daughter. He held her hands and promised to give her a new life, more noble than the title of daughter of a Marquis, in no way inferior in luxury to the imperial family. Regina replied that, even if that became the key to rebellion, she would live under her own name. The girl said she knew he wanted to get rid of her like that. The man realized that she was clearly reading his mind, and his role of doting father didn't work. He told his daughter to tell her what she wanted to say. Regina picked up a knife from the table, put it in her father's hands, and said she was giving him a chance to kill her. She said that he has time before she takes over the tomb, and in that time, she won't retaliate or make it public. But if he can't kill her before then, she'll kill him herself. But before that, he'll acknowledge her existence, and then she can forgive him too. Kill, die, or else confess. Cardo asked his daughter if she had to do that. She wanted to ask him the same question. Now her father was playing the unhappy man, and before that he fed poison to his returning daughter. Rena remembered that everything was happening just as it had 6 years ago. Little Rena was left all alone on the street. She did not realize where she was, because not so long ago she was at home. She had to experience a terrible thing, such that it was impossible to understand whether it was reality or illusion. Then a stranger came to the little girl, and realizing that the girl was alone, sold her to some woman. Rena was very scared and didn't realize what this place was. The little girl cried and said that she was from the aristocracy, the daughter of Viscount Ruid, and asked to be taken home. The woman to whom the girl had been sold asked if she could write. Rena wrote a poem on paper, and it became clear that the little girl was indeed from the aristocracy. The villains put her in a cage where she cried, praying for salvation. The girl did not understand how her father could do this to her, because he said he loved her. Reina heard a man's voice calling this strange woman her sister. The man said that these same Rubles were counts, and not long ago, they had received the title of count family from the Duke of the Northern Lands. It was known that they had only one daughter, who died and was buried. The woman into whose hands Reina had fallen was contemplating what to do with the little girl. She thought of cutting off her hair and sending it to Count Rubel. The girl was threatened that if she did something stupid, she would be separated from her beautiful daddy Count for life. The girl was left alone in a neighboring building. From the window, she watched her kidnappers leave. Little Reina wondered if her father would come to rescue her, but even if he did, the girl wasn't sure she could be happy again. From the window, she saw the butler from her estate walking towards the people who had bought her, with guards behind him. Reina rejoiced, thinking the butler had come for her. The bandits said they had the child, in the back room of the inn, unharmed, and asked for money up front. At that moment, the butler and his guards killed the men who had asked for ransom for the girl. Reina watched the whole thing from the window. The guards were told to burn everything to the ground and leave no one alive. And now no one knew that the girl had survived because she was in a neighboring building. Uni lay on the couch and reflected on the fact that she and Lady had been in the palace for the third day. The first day, she had been attempted poisoned with poison. The second day, she had had champagne poured on her head. The aide wondered what kind of shape Reina would return in today. The door opened, and Uni saw Regina. She was perfectly fine. She asked why the lady was back so early. After all, she still had a lot to do before tonight. The knight was silent in response, and the assistant suspected that something was wrong. Reina replied that nothing could be hidden from her eyes, and told her that she had seen her father, and it was a forced conversation. Uni realized that Lady hadn't eaten yet, and said she would bring something to eat now. The aide set a fancy table, and Lady wondered where she got it all. Uni replied that she had gained followers in the palace. She socialized with the other maids who gave her food. Reina laughed, and told Uni that it wasn't followers, but those who relented. Milady told her assistant that she had come to talk to her about the people who would be approaching her soon. There was a high probability that they would turn out to be her father's men. The knight told Uni to leave as soon as possible if she felt that these people were dangerous. To give an example, she told her assistant that she might be offered a poison treat and needed to be careful. There was an evening of celebration at the Tuomas Palace in honor of the founding. Clavis asked the warriors of each unit if their preparations were complete. 100 years ago, this palace was the very heart of the Kingdom of Grazia. Reina was also present at the event and looked at Mr. Reina. Clavis said that the last celebration of the Empire's founding day would be held at this place today. The world inside the rift was called a tomb. The beings inside the tomb were called the dead. 100 years ago, a huge rift appeared in the palace of the Grazia Kingdom. It marked the first encounter between humans and the dead. Using the rift, the dead fell from the tomb outside and attacked the humans. Her Majesty closed the rift, the passage to the tomb, and protected their people from the dead who had encroached on their land. Clavis announced to everyone present that today they, in the place where the dead first appeared, would open the rift with their own hands. He told all those who had collected the altar stones that could open the rift that they had done a good job, and told them to obey the order of Her Majesty the Empress. Clavis announced that it was time to conquer the tomb. O slashed his palm with his dagger, and blood spurted onto the magical stones. The rift opened, and the dead rushed from there. Reina approached and addressed Duke Rignan Otterner, saying this was their first meeting, and introduced herself as Reina Rubel from the Southern Lands. The lady expressed great gratitude for saving His Highness the Duke of the Southern Lands. Ruid watched all this action and was very furious. Mr. Rin said there was no need to thank him for that, and he and his entourage were heading back. Reina turned to Ruid and asked him not to lose his dignity, or if he didn't have any, to at least have some manners. Ruid turned and said they had unfinished business. The prince wanted to avenge his humiliation in the champagne fountain and use his power against the lady he called a dog. But he was taken by the head by Clavis and told that it was time for him to leave, for his elder brother was already busy returning. The men of the Northlands were already at the gate, and Mr. Ruid ran after them, shouting for Rena not to dare think she had got off so lightly and promising that they would meet again. Clavis said that Ruid was such a cutie and had been trained so hard that he didn't even know he was a dog himself. Clavis greeted Rena and said that they hadn't seen each other in a while. He grabbed Lady's hand and she told him to let go, because you could get hurt. The cardinal told the lady that he really wanted to see her. The knight replied that it was very tiring and asked him not to pretend that they were close after a couple of meetings. Clavis noticed that when she said that, he really wanted to get to know her better. The lady said that she didn't know what to do, since she wasn't interested in him with everything. Regina jerked the arm that Clavis was holding her, turned around and left. In her room, Rena changed into her dress. Uni asked if she had just gotten there and was leaving again. The lady asked the assistant to pretend she didn't see her, and in return she would be forgiven for eating candy at this time. Uni told that these candies were given to her by the butler. She did everything as the lady said, trying to get close to the butler. Rena praised the little helper and told her to talk about all the topics that would be interesting to the interlocutor. Rena went out to the terrace, climbed on the railing, and asked her assistant to make sure no one knew about her nightly walks. She jumped off the terrace and headed out for a walk, looking for Mr. Rena. When they met, the Duke said that now the Regina he knew was back. Looking at the girl's uniform, he finally realized that she was indeed a representative of the Southern lands. Rena replied that she too was surprised to see him there and said that he acted like a son of a dog. The girl added that son wasn't a very appropriate word and he was more like a puppy. Mr. Rin blushed and said it was the same thing. The knight asked the Duke if he would go personally to conquer the tomb. Rin replied that he would have to, and assumed that she would also go personally as the representative of the Duke of the Southern Lands. Rena replied that she had been called there on that condition from the beginning. Rignan asked if she could handle it. The lady looked at the Duke and realized that he was worried about her. Rin said he didn't doubt her abilities, but the Knights of the South didn't seem reliable, though they were said to have a lot of experience. Mr. Rin told the lady that he was worried about her, as this was nothing like an earthly battle. The lady replied that it was fine, and he really shouldn't worry. Somewhere in the back of her mind, Rena was even very glad, for the tomb she had been sent to as a child was quite like home. 6 years ago, Clavis had pushed little Rena into the tomb and told her that she was about to meet the dead. Only the empress had ever made it back alive from that place. Many people had been sent there, hoping to find out what the place was, but no one had come back. Then Clavis made a condition that the little girl, who was raised in care as the empress, would return safe and sound and become as great as the empress, and he would wait here. He left the little girl shouting after her that when she returned, she could take revenge on him. In Tuomas's palace, the rift had been opened. Guards stood around it. Ruid thought it was a diabolical act to open the rift no matter what. Clavis told Ruid that time does not run forward in the tomb. Everything inside the tomb is frozen, so the time spent there is not even equal to an hour on Earth. Hearing this, Mr. Rin said that this in itself would be passed on to the east. Rignan was heading towards the rift, Ruid shouting to him to stop, for it was the North's turn to lead the guard. Clavis said he shouldn't say that, for the Duke had expressed his desire to go to the rift first. That's why he was here. Mr. Rin headed to the rift and said he would go alone. The more he looked into the rift, the more what he saw distorted his mind. Duke's skin was burning, but the silver ring on his finger didn't react in any way. Turning around, the Duke saw that Ruid had gone after him. In the Southern Branch Palace, Rena with Uni stood at Duke Alice's desk and asked what had happened to the Southern Knight Order and where all the knights who participated in the Silent War had gone. Bill Alice answered that the consequences of the war, just as ruthless as the war itself, and the knights regulated the situation in the South, so the squad is composed of people with little experience, and yet the entire staff was assembled from the descendants of noble families. The Duke gave Rena a list of names of the knightly order. Looking there, she saw that they were all from the family of the famous. However, these people, they were just abandoned children, and there was no hope of returning alive. So the parents would send the children that were not needed, and if there were no such children, they would take foster children. The Duke told Renee that she could do whatever she wanted with them, but just not treat them as abandoned. He explained that he had put her in charge of the Southern Division just so they wouldn't be abandoned. After all, she was the only one he could trust. Alice asked her to take care of those children. Rena replied that if he asked, she would do her best, follow orders and bring back the good name of the Southern Army. Regina walked into the training room of the Southern Army. The knights said they could not recognize her as commander-in-chief. The lady replied that the Duke of the Southern Lands himself appointed her to the position. Rena asked what reason they had for not wanting to recognize her as commander-in-chief. The knight replied that they couldn't trust her because she was too young and her origins were unknown, and besides, she was a woman. Rena said that the knights have no choice, and they can complain to the Duke about it if they wish. The knight was furious and wanted to attack her. A conflict was brewing. Regina and Ruid were talking while inside the tomb and almost started to fight. At that moment, stones fell from above. The boys didn't realize what was happening. Regina rode off on his horse in the other direction, and Ruid rushed after him. They came to the edge of the cliff and saw a strange castle. It was oddly shaped, with no gates, no canals, and it was in a place where only dead people lived. Mr. Rin realized that it was probably the castle where the King of the Dead lived. The Duke saw dead people walking on all sides around the castle, and there were a lot of them. Regina and Ruid made the decision to go back. After returning from the tomb, the Duke of the Eastern Lands sat in his study. He talked about the strange sight he had seen in the tomb. It all looked as if all the dead people were being made in the castle. Because of the vast and confusing landscape, the Duke and the Prince had to wander for a long time before they returned. The tomb was too different from the surface of the earth. The knight reported to Mr. Rin that there was a strange peculiarity, and from the time they entered the rift and came out, only 15 minutes had passed. The Duke was surprised, as he and Ruid had wandered there for at least 3 hours. Regina remembered what Clavis had said about time stopping flowing in the tomb, and realized that the words about another passage of time were true. Both the enemy and the location were unknown. The knight reported to the Duke that there was more news. A knight of the south had attacked Miss Rena with a sword, and the wound was quite serious. Regina stood up abruptly, slapped the table, and asked how the lady was feeling. The subordinate told the Duke that the lady was unhurt, but the attacking knight was abused by Miss Rena and was in serious condition. Uni asked Regina what happened in the training room and said that Lady finally punished all those scoundrels. Rena said it was all silly rumors and the knight fell on his own. That made the little helper a little upset. The protagonist was drinking tea and thinking about how little time was left before the tomb trek, and it bothered her that the Knights of the South were still a bunch of youngsters. At that moment, Uni held out to the lady an invitation from the cardinal for a formal dinner. This invitation was addressed to Rena, Regina, and Ruid. Clavis wrote that he hoped they would join and enjoy a formal dinner with him. Rena arrived at the dinner and sat next to her significant other, Mr. Regina. Clavis turned to the girl and said that he had heard rumors about how she was particularly friendly with the Order of Knights. The girl asked what reason she had been called here. Clavis replied that a full-fledged march on the tomb was about to unfold, and everyone knew how important the advanced detachment of the first passage was. The cardinal offered to lead that squad to the south. Regina and Ruid were shocked at these words. Clavis told Renee to lead the squad and lead north and east. The protagonist asked if that was an order. Clavis replied that without her consent, this order was not valid. Thus, the cardinal wanted to trap Rena and kill her to help her father finish what he had started. Clavis continued to tell those sitting at the table that today, Prince Ruid and the Duke of the East were the first to visit the tomb, and told them that the landscape there was very strange. The cardinal thought it best to attack familiar opponents first. He was referring to the newborns. In the past, during the Silent War, the South had fought the dead to the last man. The cardinal felt they should have gotten to know them well in that time, and decided he would give the South a chance to wash away their shame. Clavis watched Regina's reaction carefully. He wondered what she would choose. The girl replied that she would be honored to go to the front lines in her first military campaign. Rena said that in return, she would have a request to change the date of the trek and go in 2 days. At night, Regina met again for the hike with Mr. Rena. He was curious as to why the hike had to be in 2 days. The lady replied that if there was enough time, her father would prepare another trap. Because the East was still making preparations for the military march, Rena's act embarrassed Rignan and caused difficulties. The girl felt guilty in front of the Duke. Mr. Rin told the protagonist that the more difficult it was, the more interesting it was to watch her. Regina asked what kind of person he thought she was. Rignan replied that she was a strange person and, immediately, took back what he said. Rena laughed. The Duke said he believed in her and hoped the girl would not get hurt. The lady also hoped he wouldn't be hurt and asked him to listen carefully to the information that was related to the military campaign. The next day, Rena was preparing for a solo trek to the tomb. After hearing about it, Duke Alice rushed over to her. He said that this had never happened before and she would be the first and last to do such a thing. Rena laughed and said she would be honored to be the only one in history. Bill Alice got even angrier because of these jokes. He thought that Rena should have brought the knights from the south with her. It was obvious that the Duke was very worried about the main character. Regina walked up to him and told him to have faith in her, for her victory would be their common victory. Clavis stood at the entrance to the tomb where Rena Rubel was headed. He said he hoped for her, and for the glory of the Empress, sent the girl to new horizons. There was a book in the Empire about what lies beyond this rift. It was the story of a quest to the tomb of Empress Nihil Grazia. From the rift split like lightning, creatures that no one had ever seen before emerged. Nihil was the last of the Grazia family. She took the sword and jumped into the rift. Waiting for her at the very edge of the gorge were 5 kings, long dead and buried. The dead men told her that they were their ancestors, and this place was called a tomb, and they ruled here. Nihil asked why they would rule over a place full of only dead men. The kings who ruled the age continued to hold power even after death because their passion could not be consumed even by death. The dead once again coveted the surface of the earth. Nihil said that this surface belonged to the living. The dead kings believed that all these lands belonged to them, and they left nothing as an inheritance to the humans. The dead in the tomb had no eyes or nose, but their ears possessed a terrifying sensitivity. Should they catch the slightest sound, they would rush like arrows and mindlessly tear their prey apart. The one who commanded these dead men was one of the 5 kings, the king who had absorbed the first shriek. When Nihil met him, she asked why his people could not see. In response, the Empress heard that they were a people filled with regrets and could not look at the world straight on. Their punishment was to live over and over what they regretted the most. When Nihil Grazia chopped the king, a shining heart fell out of him. She was about to touch that heart with the tip of her sword, but the king, who had turned into a black shadow, snatched the heart and disappeared. The king, who had absorbed the first shriek, clutched his heart in his hands and hid in the very depths of the castle. Regina continued to move through the tomb. The closer she was to the castle, the denser the rows of dead people were. She wanted to slip through quietly, but the path was too narrow. Rena saw an arrow fly into the rock, and all the dead went that way, reacting to the sound. The girl realized that thanks to the arrow, the path was cleared. Regina saw Mr. Rin on the rock. He was the one who fired that arrow and helped her. The knight told Regnan that at this rate, the South could take all the honors. Duke Rin announced to all his knights that they would not be going to the castle, but were going after the trophy. On their last night out, Regina asked Rignan not to go to the castle, and he listened to her. From above, arrows were fired at the protagonist, on which she saw the seal of the North. Her father gave the order to shoot his own daughter. Rena was covered by dead men from the arrows. They were all aimed at the girl. The protagonist realized that her father had come to kill her. Regina shouted loudly for all the dead people to head in her direction. The protagonist got lost in a bunch of monsters and her father couldn't see her anymore. One of the knights was telling Cardinal Rubel that more dead people were approaching them. Rena's father put the command in his subordinate's hands and said he had somewhere to go. At the cliff, Regina met her father, who noticed that she had hurt herself and said she looked pathetic, unlike the one who was swearing at the top of her throat. Cardinal Rubel was walking towards his daughter with the desire to kill her. The protagonist said that she wanted to live, wanted to exist under the name Reina Rubel. Marquise gave the command to get rid of this girl. Regina threw one of the dead men into the crowd of knights and ran towards her father. She swung a dagger at him and told him he had failed again in his attempt to kill her. The girl didn't stick the dagger into her father, but into the rock. Rina pushed her father off the cliff, his eyes full of terror. The daughter did not let him fall and pulled him out, saying that she decided to play a trick on him. The girl promised Cardinal Ruid that she would not eliminate him until the trek to the tomb was over. Rina's father realized that she was going to play a trick on him from the beginning. The girl told her father to turn around and look at the dead people. They became like this because they killed their children. Cardinal had disowned his child for his own well-being. Regina thought it was funny that so many people had gotten rid of their own children with their own hands. Rina told her father that she didn't think he was a monster or a devil and that he was just a common coward. Cardinal replied that she was right. The man rose from his knees and walked over to his daughter. Cardinal told Regina that a weak man would only bow his knee to a monster. He took the girl by the shoulders, and she felt the poison that was in her father's ring enter her body. The father pushed Regina into the abyss. Looking after his falling daughter, he said that he wanted to make sure what her nature was, and promised that if she survived and came back again, he would recognize that she had indeed turned monster. Cardinal returned to Ruid and told him that the ranks of the dead weren't thinning and it was pointless to continue fighting. They must return. The prince responded with outrage and said that the North doesn't know what it is to retreat. He told them to stop whining and kill them all. Ruid punched Ruid and the man fell unconscious. Cardinal threw the prince onto his horse and apologized for his tactlessness. One of the knights shouted that the castle was beginning to collapse. Ruid didn't realize what was wrong. The place where the castle stood turned into a swamp, and all the dead people disappeared. Cardinal ordered the entire state to drop everything they were doing and dig up the ground looking for trophies. The troops of the North dug the ground looking for the trophies for 5 days, but they couldn't find anything. Cardinal decided that they would have to return empty-handed. He believed that the most important thing was the result, and considering that there was no sign of the East or South's army in those 5 days, he decided that they were all dead. Ruid told them to end the search. He decided that they would return and declare victory for the North. When they returned from the rift to Tuom's palace, they were sure they were returning victorious. Clavis noticed that there were very many wounded, but the North returned empty-handed. Cardinal said that the castle suddenly collapsed and they couldn't find anything. However, they were the only ones to return alive. Clavis saw someone else coming from the rift. Cardinal could not believe his eyes, for he was sure that all the others had been destroyed. Mr. Rignan had returned with the East troops and brought the spoils with him. The armies of the East had had a hard time. As trophies, the Eastern troops brought back a huge amount of gold. Clavis said that this is what is great about going to the tomb, because you don't have to wait long for results. The army of the East spent 11 days in the tomb, while the army of the North spent 7 days. As Clavis expected, time flowed differently for everyone inside the tomb. He noted that the North returned 4 days earlier than the East, and even empty-handed. Cardinal said that instead of a castle, there was only a black swamp and no jewels or the king's heart. Clavis replied that it had been empty before, and that someone had gotten the king's heart in just 1 day. Cardinal Ruid wondered who was ahead of them. Turning around, Ruid saw Regina. Her father could not believe she was alive, for he had personally injected her with the deadly poison and had seen her fall from the cliff with his own eyes. He thought his daughter was a monster, a devil, and wanted to understand what trick she had used. Cardinal didn't believe it and asked to see the king's heart that the deputy duke of the southern lands had brought. He wanted to make sure. Clavis told the servant to bring the king's heart. Cardinal looked at the ring and said it couldn't be the king's heart. Clavis recalled the biography of the empress, which said that when she pierced the king, a shining heart fell to the ground, and the king put his own heart on his finger and hid deep in the castle. Cardinal continued to be indignant and said that this was impossible. The cardinal said that the empress had already personally checked everything, praised Knight Rina, and gave her the silver key. Clavis ordered Ruid to go to the main palace and deliver the news of the victor on behalf of the South and Knight Rina. The man was horrified and thought it was all some kind of joke by the devil back from hell. He had failed utterly. Cardinal Ruid lay in his bed and reflected on the fact that the years were taking their toll and his shoulder was taking longer to recover, not like it used to. Next to him was his son, whose name was Angie Ruid. The younger Ruid was talking about the victor of a military campaign. It seemed to him that this woman really looked like his dead sister. Angie thought he was naive, too weak. He wanted to be at least half as good as his sister. During another night out, Rignan told Renee that there were rumors that she had died on a hike and the Marquise had pushed her off a cliff. The girl laughed and asked who told him such a ghastly thing. Regina wanted to calm Mr. Rin down. He took her hand and asked her again if Marquis really pushed her off the cliff. The girl replied that she would tell her story in front of everyone anyway, and asked the Duke to tell her how he spent his time in the tomb. On the first day, Rignan led the army of the eastern lands to where the castle was clearly visible, but suddenly it began to fall apart before his eyes. Underneath the structure, a passage underground was revealed. The underground cavern was filled with jewels, just as Regina had said.